You walk through any British supermarket and you probably don't think much about where the things in your trolley came from. You grab your custard powder. You reach past the HP sauce. You drop a bar of chocolate into the basket, maybe pick up a box of tea bags, and you carry on. You've done it 100 times. But here's what nobody ever told you at the checkout. A shocking number of the foods and drinks that define British daily life did not come from London, did not come from the grand country estates of the English countryside, did not emerge from some Parisian kitchen or Italian village. They came from Birmingham, from the workshops and chemist shops and factory floors of a working city that spent centuries quietly inventing the things the whole world would end up eating. Today we're counting down 10 foods that were invented in Birmingham, and by the time we get to number 1, you are going to look at your kitchen cupboard very differently. Stay until the end, because the last one on this list is the one nobody ever connects to the city, and it might be the most surprising food origin story in British history. Number 10. The Balti curry. Walk down Ladypool Road on a Friday evening, and you can smell it from 100 yards away. The sizzle of spiced oil in a flat steel dish, the steam rising off lamb that's been cooked over a high flame with ginger, garlic, and a spice blend that you will not find replicating in any restaurant outside the West Midlands. The Balti is arguably Birmingham's greatest contribution to the British diet. And the story of how it got here is as rich and layered as the dish itself. In the 1970s, Birmingham's Pakistani and Kashmiri communities were settling into the city in large numbers, many of them around the Sparkbrook, Balsall Heath, and Moseley areas of South Birmingham. These were families from the Baltistan region of Pakistan and Kashmir, and they brought their cooking with them. What developed in the kitchens and restaurant back rooms of that community was something entirely new. Traditional Kashmiri flavors were adapted, accelerated, and served in a distinctive flat-bottomed steel dish, the Balti bowl, which gave the whole thing its name. The Urdu word Balti means bucket. The dish cooked and served in the same vessel, brought to your table still sizzling on the metal, is a Birmingham invention in every practical sense that matters. There was no equivalent back in Pakistan, no restaurant tradition in Baltistan that produced this particular format. It grew here, in this city, from the creativity and practical ingenuity of immigrant cooks feeding their communities and, eventually, feeding the entire country. By the 1980s, the Balti Triangle, that cluster of curry houses along Ladypool Road, Stony Lane, and Stratford Road, had become a pilgrimage destination for food lovers from across Britain. Chefs who trained in those kitchens went on to open restaurants in every major British city. The Balti formula spread, was imitated, was simplified, and mass-produced and frozen and sold in supermarkets as a shadow of itself. But the real thing still lives in Birmingham. Over 100 curry houses serve it the original way, in the original dish, at a pace of cooking that requires real skill. If you have never sat in a Balti house in South Birmingham and watched that dish arrive at your table still spitting with heat, you have not eaten a Balti. You have eaten an approximation. The original is Birmingham, and always was. Number 9. Pork scratchings. This one might make you laugh, but do not underestimate it. Pork scratchings are one of the defining snacks of British pub culture. You find them at the bar in every corner of the country, in the foil packets with the pig on the front, hard and salty and perfect, alongside a pint. But their origins belong firmly to the Black Country, that cluster of towns and industrial communities that sits to the west of Birmingham proper and considers itself distinct from the city, while being inseparably connected to it. The story of pork scratchings is a story of extreme thrift. Working families in the Black Country kept pigs in their backyards during the industrial era, feeding them on scraps and household waste, building them up through the year. When slaughter time came, the principle was absolute. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the animal had a use. The skin was salted, dried, and rendered in its own fat. What came out of that process was the crunchy, dense, intensely savory piece of deep-fried pork rind that we now call a pork scratching. It was working-class food in the truest sense, born of necessity, requiring no fancy ingredients, costing almost nothing, and delivering an enormous amount of flavor and satisfaction per penny spent. Factory workers carried them in pockets. Pub landlords sold them at the bar because they made drinkers thirsty, and drinkers kept drinking. The black country scratching gradually evolved from a homemade household staple into a commercial product, packaged and distributed across the country, adopted by pubs everywhere, eventually landing in supermarkets and service stations, from Cornwall to Caithness. Today, pork scratchings are sold across the globe. They have been enthusiastically adopted by adherents of low-carbohydrate diets who discovered that a food born in a Victorian backyard happened to be perfect for their 21st century nutritional requirements. The world caught up with the black country eventually. It usually does. Number 8. Bird's custard. And here is one that lives in almost every kitchen in Britain, and the story behind it is one of the most quietly human origin stories in food history. In 1837, a chemist named Alfred Bird opened a small shop on Bull Street in Birmingham. He was trained, precise, curious, the kind of man who treated a cooking problem the same way he would treat a chemistry problem, which is to say with patience, experimentation, and a complete refusal to accept that something was impossible simply because nobody had done it before. His wife Elizabeth had a serious problem. She was allergic to eggs. In the mid-19th century, this meant she could not eat traditional custard. Because custard at the time was made almost entirely from egg yolks, it also meant she could not eat bread leavened with yeast, which was another problem, but we'll come back to that. Alfred Bird, being the kind of man he was, simply decided to solve it. He spent his evenings after the shop closed, experimenting with different thickening agents until he arrived at a formula using corn flour, a substance that could thicken milk into a smooth, pourable sauce without any eggs whatsoever. He made it for Elizabeth. She could finally eat custard. And then, something unexpected happened. One evening, the egg-free custard was accidentally served to dinner guests, either by design or by genuine accident, depending on which version of the story you prefer. The guests loved it. They asked for more. They told their friends. Alfred Bird realized that the thing he had made for his wife in the kitchen of their Birmingham home had appeal far beyond their dining room table. He went into business, and by 1844, he was marketing Bird's custard powder nationally. By the time of the First World War, his custard was being supplied to the British Armed Forces. Today, the original custard factory in Digbeth, the building where Alfred Bird and Sons once produced millions of tins of powder, has been converted into a creative and cultural hub full of independent shops, restaurants, and studios. The building kept its name. Birmingham kept its recipe, and no British Sunday dinner has felt complete without custard ever since. Number 7. Bird's baking powder. We stay with Alfred Bird for a moment, because his contribution to Birmingham's food history does not end with custard. In 1843, 6 years after solving the custard problem, Alfred turned his attention to bread. His wife Elizabeth could not tolerate yeast, which meant traditional yeasted bread was as much off the menu for her as egg custard had been. Once again, Alfred approached it as a chemistry problem. He developed what he called Bird's fermenting powder, a combination of bicarbonate of soda and tartaric acid that produced carbon dioxide bubbles when mixed with liquid, causing dough to rise without any yeast whatsoever. This was baking powder, and Alfred Bird invented it. The principle was not entirely new in the abstract sense. Various chemists had explored similar ideas, but Bird was the first to create a reliable, shelf-stable, commercially viable product that ordinary cooks could use at home without any specialist knowledge. By 1843, he was selling it in his Birmingham shop. By 1855, so he had convinced the British War Department to supply his baking powder to troops fighting in the Crimea, a remarkable feat of salesmanship for a Birmingham chemist who had started by trying to feed his wife bread she could actually eat. Baking powder changed home cooking permanently. The ability to make cakes, scones, muffins, soda bread, and quick breads without yeast or specialist skills opened up a whole world of baking to ordinary families. Every packet of baking powder you have ever used in your kitchen traces its direct lineage back to Alfred Bird, a Birmingham chemist, and the practical problem of feeding his wife. Number 6. Cadbury chocolate. In 1824, a young Quaker man named John Cadbury opened a small grocer's shop at 93 Bull Street in Birmingham. Among the goods he sold were cocoa and drinking chocolate. which he prepared himself behind the counter using a mortar and pestle. It was a respectable product for a respectable establishment in a respectable city, and nobody who walked through that door in 1824 could possibly have imagined what would eventually grow from it. John Cadbury's business expanded steadily. He moved to larger premises. He brought his sons Richard and George into the business, and then the brothers made a decision that changed everything. They invested in a new way of processing cocoa, a Dutch press that extracted much of the cocoa butter from the beans. This allowed them to make a purer, smoother, more palatable chocolate than anything previously available in Britain. In 1879, they built an entirely new factory south of Birmingham on 14.5 acres of land beside a stream called the Bourne, and they added the French word for town and called it Bourneville. The factory they built there was not just a chocolate factory, it was a social experiment. George Cadbury believed that factory workers deserved decent conditions, fresh air, space to breathe. He built houses for his workers, sports grounds, gardens. Bourneville became one of the first model villages in England, a utopian attempt to prove that a profitable business and a humane working environment were not incompatible. Cadbury went on to become one of the largest and most beloved chocolate companies in the world. Products like dairy milk, roses, and creme egg are now known in every country on earth. The company changed ownership many times, eventually landing with Mondelez International, and production has spread globally. But the origin is unmistakable. A Birmingham grocer, a mortar and pestle. Bull Street, 1824. That is where it started. Number 5. Typhoo tea. In 1903, a Birmingham grocer and businessman named John Sumner Jr. made a decision that would put his city's name, in a roundabout way, on the tea shelves of the entire nation. His sister had told him about the health properties of tea made from the small leaf tips at the end of the tea plant. The fannings, which were generally discarded or sold cheaply because they were considered inferior. But John believed those small tips produced a lighter, more digestible brew with a calming effect on digestion. He began blending and selling his own tea from the family's Birmingham grocery shop, naming it Typhoo, after the Chinese word for doctor. He marketed it explicitly as a health aid, good for anxiety, good for indigestion, and a cup of Typhoo, a restorative as much as a beverage. By the 1920s, Typhoo had opened a factory in the Digbeth district of Birmingham and was growing rapidly. The brand distinguished itself in another way that had nothing to do with health claims. Typhoo was one of the very first tea companies to sell pre-packaged, ready-measured tea rather than loose leaf sold by weight. This was a genuinely significant innovation in convenience. Instead of scooping tea from a caddy and guessing at quantities, you bought it already portioned, already packaged, already labeled. The tea bag had not yet arrived. But Typhoo's pre-packaged approach was a step in the same direction, making tea simpler and more accessible for ordinary households. The Birmingham factory closed in 1978, unable to compete with larger, automated production facilities elsewhere. But the brand survived, and the tea that John Sumner created in a Birmingham grocery shop is still poured into cups across Britain every single day. Number 4. HP sauce. The bottle carries a picture of the Houses of Parliament. The name stands for Houses of Parliament. The sauce is as British as anything you can name. And yet the truth of where HP sauce came from is a story with several competing claims, each with its own evidence and its own advocates. What is undisputable is this. The Midland Vinegar Company, based in Aston Cross, Birmingham, is the company that made HP sauce the product you know today. The recipe's origin traces to a Nottingham grocer named Frederick Gibson Garton, who developed a brown sauce in the 1890s and trademarked it as HP sauce in 1895 because he had heard a restaurant inside the Houses of Parliament was serving something similar, and then found himself unable to settle a debt with his vinegar suppliers, who happened to be the Midland Vinegar Company of Aston Cross, Birmingham. In 1899, the Midland Vinegar Company's representative visited Garton to collect the outstanding debt. The outcome of that meeting was that Garton sold the name and the recipe for HP sauce for £150. The Birmingham Company relaunched it in 1903, added the now iconic lithograph image of the Houses of Parliament to the label, and began manufacturing it at scale in Aston. For over a century, the smell of malt vinegar and molasses drifted across that part of North Birmingham from the HP factory. A pipeline famously carried vinegar over the top of the A38 motorway when the road bisected the site. In 2006, Heinz announced it was moving production to the Netherlands, a decision met with such fury that a local member of parliament brandished a bottle of HP sauce on the floor of the House of Commons in protest. The factory closed in 2007, but Birmingham made HP sauce for over 100 years. Every English breakfast that ever had a dark slick of brown sauce squeaked onto the side of the plate was, for most of its existence, the product of Aston, Birmingham. Number 3. The Brummie Balti, reimagined for the world. We return briefly to the Balti, but this time to talk about what happened to it after Birmingham exported it to the world. Because the story of the Balti does not end in the 1970s with its invention in those South Birmingham kitchens. It continues into the present day in ways that show exactly how Birmingham's food culture shapes eating habits far beyond the city's borders. The Balti Triangle, that stretch of Ladypool Road, Stony Lane, and Stratford Road, draws over 20,000 visitors every year. Food writers, restaurant critics, culinary tourists, and ordinary families make the journey specifically to eat the real thing. Birmingham's curry house culture gave rise to generations of chefs who trained in those restaurants and carried the techniques and the flavor principles into every corner of the country. The particular method of cooking a Balti, high heat, a specific combination of whole and ground spices, the use of the steel dish as both cooking vessel and serving plate, the practice of eating directly from that dish with naan bread, rather than transferring to a plate. These things were codified in Birmingham and spread outwards from Birmingham. The global frozen food industry noticed. The Balti-style curry became a supermarket staple. But anyone who has eaten a ready meal described as a Balti and then eaten the real thing in a Balti Triangle restaurant will tell you the same thing. The real one is in Birmingham. It always was. Number 2. Brummie bacon cakes and the city's working-class food tradition. Birmingham's food history is not all chocolate factories and international brands. Some of it is far more intimate and far more local, the kind of food that never made it onto a supermarket shelf because it was never really meant to. Brummie bacon cakes are the clearest example. This is a dish that belongs entirely to the city, made from flour, salt, butter, or margarine, chopped bacon and grated cheese, mixed together and baked until golden. No special equipment, no unusual ingredients, no culinary technique that required training. Just good, filling food made quickly from what was available, designed to feed working people on working schedules. The dish reflects something essential about Birmingham's food identity, which is that the city has always known how to make something satisfying out of very little. The same instinct that produced pork scratchings from pigskin, that produced faggots from offal and breadcrumbs, that produced a thick, sweet broth from beef scraps and whatever vegetables were cheapest that week, runs through Brummie bacon cakes. It is the food of a manufacturing city, pragmatic and honest and deeply comforting. The historian Glyn Purnell, now one of Birmingham's most celebrated chefs with a Michelin-starred restaurant of his own in Edgbaston, has spoken about this tradition with genuine affection. In 2014, he recreated a penny soup from an 1793 recipe by Matthew Bolton, the Birmingham inventor and industrialist, serving it as a fine dining course at his restaurant. The point was serious. The food of Birmingham's working people has always been worth honoring. It just took a while for the rest of the country to recognize it. Number 1. Bird's custard powder. Again, and why it changed everything. We return to Alfred Bird for the final entry, but this time, the story is not just about custard. See, it is about what custard powder actually represented when it arrived in 1837, and why its significance reaches far beyond dessert. Before Bird's custard, producing a sweet, smooth, pourable sauce to go over a pudding required eggs, skill, constant attention, and a significant risk of the whole thing curdling the moment you looked away. It was the kind of dish that required either a trained cook or an experienced housewife who had made it dozens of times. For most working families in Victorian Britain, a proper egg custard was a treat. something for special occasions when you could afford the eggs and had the time to stand over the stove, stirring continuously. Bird's custard powder changed all of that in a single stroke. Mix the powder with milk, heat it, stir it, done. No eggs, no risk of curdling, no skill required. The custard went from a luxury that required expertise to a routine part of everyday eating for ordinary families across the country. The psychological and social impact of that shift is enormous and almost completely uncelebrated. Alfred Bird did not invent a condiment or a sauce or a flavor. He invented accessibility. He democratized a dish that had previously been gated by wealth and skill, and he did it from a chemist's shop on Bull Street in Birmingham, because he wanted his wife to be able to eat pudding. And that is the thread that runs through every single item on this list today. The Balti came from immigrant families, feeding their communities with what they knew. Pork scratchings came from factory workers refusing to waste a single part of the animal. Cadbury's chocolate started as a grocer behind a counter with a mortar and pestle. HP sauce was sold off for £150 by a man drowning in debt. Typhoo tea began in a family shop because someone's sister shared some useful information about tea tips. None of these things began with grand ambitions or vast capital. They began with people trying to solve a practical problem, feed their family, use what they had, serve their community. Birmingham is a city built on exactly that instinct. That is the 10 foods invented in Birmingham, and the city that gave you the Balti, the chocolate factory, the custard powder, and the brown sauce deserves far more credit than it usually receives. Now you know. Go check your kitchen cupboard. If you found something in there today that you never knew began in Birmingham. Drop a comment below and tell us what it was. Subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the food histories that shape the way Britain eats, and we will see you next time.